All Cooper CPAs, located in the heart of East Nashville, offer a wide variety of tax services for individuals and businesses. Contact them at 615-257-0646 and visit their website, allcooper.com, for a full list of services.
Today's show is brought to you by locally owned and operated Highland Rim Speedway. Highland Rim Speedway is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year with great short-track, door-to-door stock car racing in a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. Visit their website at highlandrim.com.
Well, the party's over in Washington, or is it just getting started? Coming up next on Political Soup, we'll talk with our own Chip Forrester, who got to see Monday's festivities up close and personal. And what is the Boehner Compromise, and will it put an end to the never-ending battle over the family's money? And President Obama's ambitious plans include a change in his approach to gun control. We're stirring it up, right up to a boil. Next on Political Soup.
From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com. Bandwidth for today's show is brought to you by SoftLayer.com. We love SoftLayer here at Talkopolis. They are the greatest hosting company ever. They make everything easy. Check out their website at SoftLayer.com. Thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Microcasting for your city. Talkopolis.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Williams, and welcome to Political Soup. The guys who make this thing really run. With me, as always, Crom Carmichael, Chip Forrester. We start to our right. Crom, you look rather well-rested today.
Well, I haven't been anywhere, Joe. That's the problem.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, your partner, Mr. Forrester, welcome in. Glad to see that you are vertical and taking nourishment after a week in Washington. And, just tell us. You had a good time.
Well, it was a great time. I have to say I'm a little weary. Got in late last night from all the inaugural festivities and the swearing in of the president. But what was really incredible about it is, regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, to see a peaceful transition. It really wasn't a transition because we were swearing him in for his second term, but to see that process is just inspiring. And really, the bipartisanship of it. Senator Lamar Alexander delivered some remarks that were just really great. Bob Corker was right up front. Could see him hanging over the balcony, and it's just a great experience to be in Washington. And thank God it wasn't 17 degrees like 4 years ago. It was cold, but with long underwear and a good hat, we all stayed warm.
Well, the temperature depends, I guess, on which side you were on and where you were at the time. Did we find anything out? The big deal about the inauguration, besides the festivities, everybody looks towards the president's speech, his address. Did we find anything? Did he share anything we weren't expecting?
Well, I do not have a clue what the president's domestic agenda is for the next 4 years, and I don't even know what it is for the next 1 year.
Oh, come on, Crom. He talked about immigration reform and climate change, the fiscal cliff. He talked all about that with powerful language in his inaugural remarks.
That was a repeat of 4 years ago. I'm just saying, I don't know what he's going to do. The fiscal cliff is over, but the budget and the debt is not over. He's made it pretty clear in his inaugural speech that entitlements are off the table. And so I don't have a clue how he addresses the budget deficit, because let's remember, starting next year, January 1st, we had $100 billion a year. That's, in Washington speak, that's $1 trillion, because they do everything in 10-year increments. Yeah. We had $100 billion a year for Obamacare. And that's not even, it doesn't even raise an eyebrow now in Washington. Well, so Social Security's off the table, Medicare's off the table, Medicaid's off the table, food stamps are off the table, aid to families with dependent children's off the table, and now you got Obamacare. So when I say I don't have an idea, I literally have no idea what the president wants to do.
Well, a couple comments. One, some of those things have been on the table, but let me step back. I think what was important about his inaugural address is that the president defined where he stands on these core issues: climate change, legislation on that, gun violence, and immigration reform. He was very clear. And the interesting thing was, coming off his powerful reelection And this speech, he's in the driver's seat. And it's fascinating that the Republicans have backed away, given some breathing room to the fiscal cliff now. John Boehner has said, we'll give it until May, which I think is a very prudent position for them to take, given the president's power right now and how he comes off of that speech.
Well, you're not talking specifically about the fiscal cliff. Now you're talking about the increase in the debt ceiling.
Pardon me.
Now, but let's look at what Boehner has done, and I think it's good, and we'll see, and we will now get to find out whether or not the president is serious about cutting spending, any spending other than military, because here's where we are now. This is fascinating because now, if you look at the fiscal cliff, normally it takes an affirmative vote for taxes to go up. With the fiscal cliff,
we go over it automatic.
Right? They would go up automatically.
Right,
it would have taken an affirmative vote to keep them from going up. Right. So that didn't happen. Now you have sequestration. You have $1 trillion spread out over 10 years.
10 years, right.
Okay, and so that's not a huge number. It sounds big, but in Washington speak, that's just not that big. But it's still a sequestration that comes up and starts in March. So if the president doesn't negotiate at all,
that goes into effect.
Then that goes into effect. Military spending gets cut, domestic spending gets cut. Then you have the budget, you have the increase in the debt. And what has Boehner done? Boehner has said, is going to pass legislation today that increases the debt ceiling for 90 days. Right. But it says that if Congress, which means the Senate, doesn't pass a budget, that no one in Congress will get a payday after that 90 days. So that means Congress will go unpaid, right. Which is what the voters have essentially said is if Congress didn't go do their job, they ought to not get paid.
And I don't think the president disagrees with that. But let me step back and just offer one other thought about all this. What's interesting about what's happening in Congress now, the rigid ideological right-wing Republicans have softened. And one of the things we've lost in our democracy, particularly over the last number of years, is an ability to have compromise. I mean, this process is like making sausage. It ain't pretty, but it is good in the end when you come up with legislation. And the fact that we've seen some softening on the part of the ideological right to compromise. And it's going to be interesting to see over the next 90 days whether Boehner can kind of bring them in. But the president has put Social Security reform. He has put Medicare and Medicaid on the table. There have been specific ideas that he's talked about. So now we'll see through this sausage-making process over the next 90 days where we get to.
Well, what will happen, Joe, is this. 1st of February, I think it's the 1st of February, but if it's not the first day of February, it's very close. The president, by law, has to submit a budget to the Congress on how much he wants to spend for all the different programs. And so now we will then find out then
what those numbers are.
If in fact he is going to cut Social Security, if he is going to cut Medicare, if those things are on the table. Because so far, and in his inaugural speech, he said they're not on the table.
Well, he also said that tax reform and getting rid of these loopholes is a key part of the component. I know last time we talked about it, you said that's tax increase. It's not. It's about reforming
the tax increase.
It's reforming the tax code.
Okay. Yeah, but it's a tax increase.
2 questions. Throw these two, and again, I sit in the middle, I'm the common man. Most folks will tell you I'm probably more common than I need to be. But if we've got $1 trillion in sequestration coming, and Obamacare is going to cost us $1 trillion, is that not a wash?
Well, that's Obamacare just for openers.
Okay.
Remember, Obamacare was $1 trillion over 10 years, and the first 4 didn't count. So it's really $1 trillion over 6.
Okay.
So it's really closer to 150 to 200 billion a year once it kicks in, and that's the low estimate. What people don't realize is that if a person goes on Obamacare and they sign up for the federal exchange in Tennessee, which the federal government said they're going to set up. If they're making $60,000 a year,
because Governor Haslam refused to set up the local exchange,
he wisely said, "I'm not going to do it."
He chose not to.
He wisely
imprudently chose.
We can talk about that another day. We can talk about that another day. But here's the specifics: a family of 4 making $60,000 will get almost $16,000 of taxpayer subsidy for their health care. Now that's a brand new entitlement. $16,000 per family of 4. Now, what we don't know is how many employers are going to say, I'd rather pay the $2,000 in penalty and let my employees be subsidized by the federal government.
Well, we'll see.
And if a larger number than 10 million do, then the number isn't 100 to 150 billion a year. It's $300 to $400 billion.
But the other point you're missing in all this, Crom, you're talking about it from the backside. The front side of it is that there are tens of millions of people who are not covered, young people who don't choose to get health care, who are now going to go into the system. They're not necessarily happy about it, but that's going to amortize the cost of health care over all that group of people. And the whole point of Obamacare is to bend the cost curve, is to bring the escalating costs of health care in our country down. Because if it continues on the curve that it's been on, there's no money. I mean, it is the single biggest challenge our economy has. And Obamacare, the components of it, and you and I can argue about whether that happens or not, bends that cost curve over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, it doesn't.
I disagree.
And I will tell you, and I'll tell you why it doesn't.
Because I'm not an expert on all those details, but what I have read, there are components to it that do bend that cost curve.
They're not. When a person goes to the doctor's office, there are 7 different entities that have to touch that invoice just to get it paid.
But there are efficiencies. They're talking about electronic medical records. They're talking about efficiencies in that system that don't exist today. It ends that.
We're
going to have to spend a whole time on
we got a whole segment here.
If a person goes to the doctor who doesn't have insurance today, how do they pay?
Either out of pocket or it's charity care.
Right, and the doctor will give a discount if they don't have to fiddle with the insurance. And they'll give somebody a discount of 50 or 60%, because I get that regularly.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Well, what I'm saying is this, Chip, they won't give it if they have to go through the bill-paying system, the insurance
managed care
system.
programs negotiate lower costs for their employees.
No, they don't. That's the whole point. Here's what happens. Here's what happens. You pay a great big insurance premium. A great big insurance premium so somebody else can negotiate the price down to a number that's higher than what the doctor would take if you just simply paid the day of the service. So you're paying more, and you're also having to pay an insurance company a huge gob of money. And Chip, in this case, it'll be the taxpayers who are paying $16,000 for an average family's insurance. It'll be the biggest entitlement we have ever had. And it will dwarf Medicare. It will dwarf Medicaid. Obamacare will be the most expensive government program ever.
I disagree. We can have a whole show on that.
Fair enough. As a matter of fact, we may discuss, my opinion as a middleman is that the entire medical billing system is broke anyway.
Right.
I'll give you the example. A couple of weeks ago, I had a medical test. I had an MRI. It was $2,800.
You're okay, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm gonna be all right.
But, we don't want to lose our host.
But $2,800 was the charge. Because of the insurance coverage, the provider was immediately cut from $2,800 to $900. And then the insurance took care of whatever. I wind up out a couple $100, whatever it was.
Out of pocket.
My concern is they charged $2,800, they got paid $900.
Where'd the rest go?
Not only that, but if I'm not covered by some kind of insurance that's negotiated this, I'm now responsible for $2,800.
So
I'm broke.
That's the fallacy.
Well,
that's the fallacy. Because my son had a stress fracture 2 years ago as a runner.
Okay.
I called 5 places. I said I need an MRI. $400 as long as I paid day of service.
Really?
Yeah, and I paid day of service. I paid day of service by credit card, $400. And this is exactly the point. They put this high retail price on it so that the insurance company can then act like they're negotiating the price down. And they negotiate it down to a really high price. It'd be like an insurance company telling you, if you'll insure your car with me, I'll help you buy that Chevrolet for $42,000 instead of $80,000. Well, you know $80,000 is a bad deal because you know what a car ought to cost, because there's a market for it. But there is no market in healthcare with the insurance companies negotiating. And let me be clear about something. I'm not saying that insurance companies are all a bunch of bad guys. I'm saying that we shouldn't be insuring something that costs $50 to $100. It ought to be paid day of service. The market would set the price, and it would be a much lower price in the aggregate than it is now. And in fact, in the example you used, it was half the price, and you're still paying a great big premium.
But Crom, what you're talking about is going back and completely reforming the whole system. It doesn't exist that way. There's a system that's in place, and
it's a mess.
It's a
and Obamacare has made it is going to make it much worse.
I disagree with you.
Well,
and the cost cutting initiatives that are in there, bending the curve. I mean, one of the things they've talked.
Not there.
They are. We need to. We'll have a whole show on it.
Yeah, we will.
Next week, I'm telling you, get your pistols ready. We're going to put them back to back and let them walk 10 paces and. we'll get this healthcare thing handled. Tell you what, there's more to come. Stay with us here on Political Soup.